Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Kelly Chan, and I am the Community Relations and Public Service Manager here at CEB. CEB stands for Continuing Education of the Bar. It is a self-sustaining nonprofit program of the University of California. Before we begin today, I just want to go over some housekeeping. We want today's talk to be as interactive as possible, so if you have any questions at any time, please chat them in. There is a chat icon at the bottom of your Zoom. If we don't get to your question during the presentation, we'll certainly have time at the end for Q&A. Today, we're going to hear from Marie Spark on project management. Marie Spark is a director of the Project Management Graduate Program at Golden Gate University in San Francisco and an active leader for the local chapter of the Project Management Institute. Marie, do you want to start by just sharing with us how you got into project management and what project management is?
That sounds great, Kelly. Hopefully everybody can hear me. So here's a little slide about me, and thanks, Kelly, for that introduction. The thing about being in project management is now it's more of a career path, but most of us who ended up as project managers are what I term an accidental project manager. That is, I didn't start out as a young child thinking I want to be a project manager. I didn't even know it existed as a field. So actually, where I got my start is actually parallel to a lot of you on this conference. I was a liberal arts major at UC Berkeley. I was a rhetoric major with actually a lot of pre-law folks. Although my ambitions were I wanted to be a journalist. So I worked for the Daily Californian, and I was worked at the CalX radio station doing news. And I landed an internship at National Public Radio in Washington, D.C. Now, when I think back, I actually realized that was my first project management job. I thought I'd landed a job in journalism, but the things I loved about it were actually that I had to coordinate things from start to finish when they interviewed people. So this was pre-internet. So the people I was working for would say, hey, Marie, there was an article about in the New York Times about this person that won a Pulitzer Prize for a story on X. Could you reach out to that person? And so I would call the newspaper, get a hold of people, coordinate. Let's say that person was in Minneapolis, then I would make sure they got to the studio in Minneapolis and set up the time and set it up in Washington. If you think about it, it's really not very much journalism, it's really coordinating. And, you know, like I said, now I realize it's project management. Then I ended up, it was the 90s, and realized journalism wasn't a great path. There was a recession on, and I went back for my MBA. And when I took an operations management class, there was a mention of project management, and all of a sudden I realized that it was tied all these things together that I enjoyed, that I really loved making things happen and coordinating things. I ended up getting a job in IBM Global Services in San Francisco, ended up at Bank of America as well, and ended up with a lengthy career in IT banking and nonprofits. And the one thing I thought I would never do is go into academics, but here I am at Golden Gate University. We are actually, this is not that crazy a place for me to be because we are a practitioner-focused university. All our faculty are industry experts. So when I decided to leave project management and go into teaching, I fell in discovering Golden Gate University and really enjoy it here. We have law and business schools. We're a nonprofit educator, and we've always been focused on the adult learner. So we started at 1901, named after Golden Gate Street, where we started at the YMCA before the Golden Gate Bridge. And since that time, we focused on the adult learner. We're an early pioneer of distance learning. A little bit of trivia, we actually had radio classes. So if you're on campus, there's a picture of classes being broadcast on the radio, and television, and now online. So anyway, this was a great home for me, and I'm very used to talking to people in different professions who are interested in project management. So for instance, I spoke to executive assistants who also are looking to project management, and have actually spoken to law students here before. So I really welcome the opportunity to talk to you today. So let me go into project management, because it's something you probably all hear about, to give you an overview of it and kind of contextualize it. Project management. Let's face it, projects aren't new. I mean, you think of the pyramids, someone had to manage that project, right? But interestingly, project management is really relatively new as a profession. I have the logo here, the Project Management Institute, which is the worldwide project management organization. It was founded in 1969, just celebrating its 50th anniversary. The formal project management was spurred by the growth of construction, defense, and aerospace, because suddenly, starting like in the 50s, 60s, there are these projects that were way too complex to wing it. And it keeps growing. PMI is one of the world's largest organizations in terms of membership, and I don't have those numbers, but I can tell you that the number of PMPs, which is Project Management Professional, that's the credential I hold, it has hit the 1 million mark worldwide, and it keeps growing. So very big growth, and this is why probably a lot of you are hearing about this. So let's talk about the need for project management, because obviously there must be a need or it wouldn't be growing. And I'm going to focus a little bit on organizations. And I know that's not necessarily the audience who's listening, but just to understand the organizational growth of project management. PMI does annual studies of organizations across industry in terms of the need for project management and the effectiveness of projects. And they keep finding that organizations lose a lot of money on projects. And the sad truth is most projects fail. So in the 2017 Pulse of the Profession, PMI found in their findings that for every $1 billion spent on projects, organizations lose about $1 million. That's a lot of money. Actually, I think it was, I said $1 million, it's $100 million. Sorry guys, $1 million doesn't sound so bad. So it sounds so bad. It's $100 million. It's like a 10% loss. So what PMI has found is that when the organizations they track, that they learn that supporting project management practices improves those success rates. So what I like saying is that project management means managing projects so that they don't manage you. It really has to do with being proactive about managing projects. And I think it's something, that mindset that attorneys would really understand in the nature of what you do. Let's talk about some key definitions. And we're going to get to the basics about like what a project is and what a project manager is. A project is a coordinated set of activities to create something new within a deadline. So if you think about it, legal work is by its nature project-based. So things like a case, that would be a project. You know, the reason I distinguish that is those ongoing activities such as, you know, managing your payroll or those kind of operational things are not part of project work. Anyway, a project manager is the person who coordinates those activities and makes sure everything is completed successfully. So if you think about it, lawyers can be seen as project managers. And you know, when in PMI's, the PMBOK, which they talk about various kinds of organizations, they view a law firm as what's called a projectized organization, which means your whole work is really focused on projects. So it makes sense we're talking about this today. I want to talk about the framework of project management skills, because to see how, like, you as attorneys, how that fits into the picture. PMI has created what they call the talent triangle. And that blue bar there, the technical project management skills, those are the traditional skills we think of as project management. Things like creating the schedule, things like creating a budget. But then there's also the green, which is the leadership and people skills. We'll be talking to that. And then, but also the third anchor is this business and strategic and business management skills. So for me, I came out of IT and banking. You know, that's what the knowledge area I bring to the table, and you all as attorneys bring the law as your subject matter expertise. And I think it's important to point that out because it's really this combination of skills that makes a great project manager. And so for me, as someone expert in banking, that's something I bring to the table. If I'm thrown into another type of project like healthcare, I'm not going to be as effective. And so, you know, speaking which, I'm not an attorney, so I'm doing my best to extrapolate, but I'm happy to answer questions and be interested in your comments because some things may not apply all the way. But definitely legal project management, and I'm going to talk a little about this in resources, has become a really burgeoning field. All right, so why do projects require specific skills anyway? And this is something that comes up time and time again with people I meet who are new to project management or people in my classes, because a lot of smart, experienced people, when they end up going into projects, in addition to the statistics that show that projects are challenging, in addition, people find personally that they get on projects and it's really hard, and they don't really necessarily understand why. Well, there's some common reasons why projects are difficult. So first of all, there's risk and uncertainty, because by its nature, every time you do a project, it's something unique. I mean, even if, let's say, a case is the type of case you do as your profession, I mean, every case is different with different, you don't never know what's going to happen from time to time. I used to teach technical students, some of whom work for cable installations for the AT&T, and they would talk to me about how every house, the installation was different because they'd end up having different challenges. So all projects are unique, and that leads to uncertainty and risk. You have deadlines. We all know that there's deadlines on any project. You have constraints because you have limited resources, limited time, limited budget, limited people available. You have stakeholders with different and often competing interests that you have to make happy or satisfy. You're managing without authority because a lot of times you're depending on people doing work for you that you're not the boss of. There's also this thing called the optimism bias that's come out of late, and I think it's something we all really think about, but it's just recently come out as a thing in neuroscience, and that is we tend to be optimistic about work needing to be done in the future. So I always think about, like, I was a procrastinator in college, I'll admit, and I used to be, if I had a paper to write, I would think I had plenty of time and I would put it off, and I think, I have 5 days left, I can do it. And then, like, I have 3 days left, I can do it. And then it'd be that all-nighter the night before the paper was due, and that was when I realized I underestimated the amount of work. And that's what happens in projects quite a bit. So I want to talk about that green part of the triangle, the leadership aspect, because the people and soft skills side of project management is just as important as any of the other skills. And in thinking about it, I realized that project managers and attorneys really share some common traits for success. So first, we're all very organized and detail-oriented. And yet at the same time, we're very goal-driven and know how to keep the eyes on the prize. Because I know as a project manager, it's very important that I keep my team's morale up by keeping them in mind of the vision for what we're trying to achieve. In the same way as an attorney, you're going through difficult work a lot of times, and it's keeping a client focused on, like, the positive goal in sight. We're great communicators. Communicating, my rhetoric degree is something I've used every day in my life as a project manager. I know as attorneys, you're all outstanding communicators. You're good at reading people and situations between the lines. It's the things that people say, but it's their body language when they don't say things. When I was a project manager during meetings and I would notice someone seemed to be uncomfortable about a topic, I didn't let it rest. I would go and talk to them and see if I could uncover what was going on. And I wouldn't have been effective if I hadn't done those things, because that's where issues can fester. And finally, we're problem solvers, because to me, when I think of an attorney is someone who solves people's problems, and project managers the same way. We try to break through people's problems to get to the solution of a project. Here's some other traits that I think are specific to project management, and you may also have these qualities, but these are things that I also think make a successful project manager. We're methodical planners. We tend to plan out everything, and the thing is, we plan it with the buy-in of the team, and we make it transparent. So things like planning the schedule, planning the budget, planning the scope, it's all done with the input of people involved to make sure that it's realistic and that everyone's bought into it. And also we track, communicate, and manage those plans, and as risks and roadblocks come up, we're open about that. We welcome open communication and we resolve those openly. One of the worst things that can happen on a project and a reason they fail is if people feel like, if I bring up a problem and I become shot as the messenger, then I'm not going to say anything, and that's how problems don't get resolved. A lot of times project management might seem like spelling out the obvious, or what seems to be the obvious to others. So you as attorneys, there's probably a lot of technical stuff that makes sense in your head, but maybe other people don't necessarily understand that. So a parallel would be when I was in IT project management, I would work with, let's say, developers or network engineers who were very technical. And one of my jobs was to translate what they were doing in English so that the end users could understand what was being done. Because to the network engineer, he would act like I was an idiot to ask for explanation, but I understood it was very important to spell that out. Another part of being a project manager is You're really a cog in a big wheel. I don't think of myself as a film director, but more of that person in the middle who is a neutral party and facilitator. You collaborate equally across stakeholder groups, manage up and manage down. So not ignoring the little guy, realizing that everyone has their importance, and being a good listener. And again, we talked about managing without authority, showing positive motivation, leadership, and appreciation of others. A lot of times it's that subtle getting people to do things without them realizing that you're convincing them. I'm a parent as well, and when my daughter was little, there was that thing of, diverting her into, rather than, disciplining her directly, it'd be that thing of, hey, didn't you really want to do this? And pushing, convincing her of something else, as opposed to being the strong arm. And that's one thing project managers know how to do. Project managers are servant leaders. So that's one of the things, a quality project manager, again, we tend to see ourselves as serving the project. And so one of the things is when the project is a success, we share that success with the team, and we really let the team take credit for what they've done. But likewise, we take accountability, and when the project fails, we sort of go down with the ship and acknowledge our culpability and try to move things forward rather than pointing fingers at others. And that is definitely something that is a quality of a great project manager. So this is the end of my section of the project management overview, and I'll pause for a moment to see if there's questions. Any questions based on what we talked about so far? Again, as Kelly said, I really welcome questions. We'll definitely have some questions, time for questions at the end. So the second half of my presentation, I'm going to be talking about project management tips for success. I have 3 areas that project managers excel in that'll help give you some general tips, but also 3 templates that you can use that will be shared for everybody who's on the call.
Hi, Marie. We do have a great question.
Wonderful.
Can you talk a little bit more about how to communicate about risks and roadblocks without being negative or a naysayer? And you might be...
Excellent. Wonderful question. So one of the things project managers do, and I don't have the template here, is to, if you have some sort of reporting where you're reporting a risk or an issue, and you just state the fact, a lot of it's stating the facts and don't make it personal, because a lot of times an issue has to do with something going wrong or something out of someone's control. I think that the thing is, one of the things project managers do is they track risks and issues. And if you make it part of tracking, and then it ends up not being personal, and it just means, and you focus on who the owner is to resolve it. I think where that thing of making it personal, where it gets personal, is project managers take the personal out of it by having tools and techniques where you're tracking things, where it's part of the procedure. So the project manager will have a list of issues, and focus on what is the next step to resolve it, and who would be the owner for that. And then it just takes the personal out of it. I think the problem is if you don't do that as a practice, then someone feels like if something's raised and they feel like if it's their fault, it becomes personal. When you make it part of a set of, okay, we just have a whole bunch of issues and risks, like item number 10 just happens to be this issue and Joe's going to resolve it. That's one of the ways we do that. Hope that helps. Were there anything else, Kelly, or should I move on?
No other questions at this time.
Okay, well, great. Well, and we'll put, like as Kelly said, we'll have more room for questions at the end. All right, so the first thing, I did talk a little bit about one of the challenges of projects are constraints. And the major principle of project management is the triple constraint, or otherwise known as the iron triangle. So projects are constrained by schedule, budget, and scope. And the reason is you change one thing and you change that it affects the others. So, you can't have everything. And so, for instance, if a client wants to add on to what the work you're doing, it's going to result in an increase in cost and schedule. And that just can't be helped. Affecting one thing affects the other. So to explain this, I always like thinking back when I was a consultant, my boss at IBM Global Services, whenever a client would ask for more, she had this little saying she would say to me, and she'd say, "There is no problem that time and money can't solve." And it was her way of saying is, well, if the client wants more, that means they're going to pay more and they're going to wait longer for results. So this is a critical thing to set expectations when changes are proposed or occur. And sometimes, clients asking for more, but sometimes things happen, and it is just going to cost more and take more time. But this is a normal thing that happens, and if you kind of think of it this way and use it as an explanation tool, it really helps for people to understand. So the tool that I'm going to show you is the project charter. And I understand, by the way, I'm talking to attorneys, and you all probably have contracts and things. Think of it as a high-level communication tool. It serves two purposes. One is to give a high-level plan and also to communicate key parts of the project. So you have the start date and some sort of projected finish date or time frame. You have a scope, which includes in the sensors or to what is the goal, what are we trying to do, is there something out of scope? Objectives and success criteria, when do we agree that the project's ending, and then also who are the roles and responsibilities on the project. You may think, oh, well, cases I do, that's too complex. This is a very simple document. How can you do that? I have to tell you, in my time at Bank of America, I was on multi-million-dollar projects where we would have a one-page document with this information. And yes, there was a lot more detail behind it, but it was a way of communicating and for everyone being clear and on the same page. I will also share with you, when I was at IBM Global Services, it was early on in their consulting days. And one of the things IBM got burned on early on was they didn't have the scope clearly defined in their projects for major clients. And IBM would say, hey, look, we finished the project. And the client would say, well, we don't think you finished it. And that's where it became very important to define these things. Okay, we're going to move on to stakeholder management. So stakeholders include everyone who has a stake in your project. That can include yourself, staff, clients. It could include competitors, and I'm assuming opposing counsel, the government, the public, and more. Project managers consider all stakeholders and balance stakeholder interests, and they work to keep key parties informed. Obviously, if someone's your opposing counsel or competitor, you may not keep them informed, but you're aware of everybody who has some sort of stake in your project. So here's some best practices that project managers use for stakeholders. And so this is more for your team being your staff, the client, whoever is directly involved, to hold a formal kickoff meeting to kick off the project, get everyone on the same page, get everyone motivated. This would be where you would talk through that scope and charter to get everyone's expectations set. Likewise, project managers do formal closeouts of projects with some sort of closeout meeting, figuring out, making sure the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, show people appreciation. One of the things project managers do is show appreciation to people who've worked very hard, because projects are hard work, and to make sure that everybody is clear on that everything's completed. Again, we were talking about managing up and managing down. Don't forget the little guy. Even that low-level person who, don't take them for granted, because sometimes those people will observe an opportunity or a risk or a problem that if they don't feel power to speak up, you may miss something important. And also, they're also, just as much supporters of the project. Everyone who puts everybody who does something is part of the project in some way. And then planning and managing communications. So as I was saying, we project managers are planners, we overplan, and communication is 90% of a project manager's job. So that includes formal, informal, and everything. But the next tool I'm going to show you is a communication plan and stakeholder register. Now this is a document that would be internal. You would not publish this, but this is for your own planning. So I kind of combined two templates into one because it's similar purposes. So the first is a stakeholder register. This is where you list the name and the position and the project role of the person. And again, sometimes people may not be on your project. They may be outside stakeholders like government agencies or opposing counsel. Then putting whether that person is supporting, neutral, or against. Obviously, if someone's a supporter, you want to make sure you're keeping track of them. Obviously, if someone's against, you want to keep track of them. There may be a neutral party, though, that you want to keep on top of, because if you do something right or you do something wrong, they may switch into the positive or negative party. Also, influence high, medium, and low. Again, you don't want to forget the low influence person, like your team member who's really a proponent of the project, But you also want to be very clear of like the high influence people who could influence your project, either positive or negative. They could either put up a roadblock or they could help you. Project managers are always thinking about who's that person who could stop my project and who is that person who can eliminate roadblocks. Communications plan, this is where you formalize preferred methods and frequency of communication. So preferred medium, does someone want a phone call? Do they want to be talked to an in-person meeting, etc.? Do they need to be communicated with frequently, weekly, monthly, quarterly? What level of information do they want? And this is being kind of living, because you may realize that someone really needs more information than you thought. One thing when I was thinking about this, because this is written from a project management perspective, the other thing I think you should think about as an attorney is, this is communication out, but I think you should also think of communication in, because I'm guessing one of the client's frustrations might be when they're trying to communicate to you or your staff. So a fun thing to think about is, and project managers tend to have a service level agreement in terms of responses. So you might come up with, when a client wants to reach you, how's the best way, and what is your sort of response time, when they reach you, and come up with how they can reach you for different kinds of issues. So that's something that's not in this template, but I just want to throw out there as something project managers do tend to do with their team, and is something that you could incorporate. But again, these are internal, but this is a way that the project manager stays organized with how they're dealing with people. It's like a soft skill, and yet, once again, it's putting things in a structured way so that you can manage to it. So tip number 3 is something you probably expected me to talk to immediately, which is about creating project schedules. So because that's what people think of with project managers. And yes, project managers plan, track, and communicate project schedules. And of course, schedules will change. So that is one of the challenges when someone's starting out. They think, well, the schedule can change. It may not be the same all through the project, because that's the nature. We said projects are risky, there's uncertainty. But what project managers do is they plan for that. You create a best estimate schedule based on what you know to start, and then you actively communicate the schedule and manage changes as they arise. Your goal as project manager is to limit changes as much as possible, but I'm assuming the legal profession, there's a lot of that's very much out of your control. So I'm going to show you some very simple templates. There's 2 templates to manage your schedule. This one is a milestone chart at the project level. I broke it out into 3 sort of phases. There's initiation and planning phase, there's execution phase, and closing. You have a task name, description, some sort of expected start and completion date, who the owner is of that task. Owner is important because then you know who is responsible. Dependencies and risks, is it something where you're waiting on someone to do it? Is there a risk there? And then status red, yellow, green is a standard quick way of knowing, is it positive or negative in terms of how it's going. And then I put on the bottom expected project completion date and overall status. I have a similar milestone chart at the portfolio level, and this is if you were wanting to do this with multiple cases. And I apologize, I'm saying project, and I know you probably are thinking case. But this is a way, project managers use both of these if they're managing multiple projects, because at the project level, they'll have what they need to do for the project. And then at the portfolio level, they will want to have a dashboard to show how are my projects doing, are they positive, negative, is something red where I really need to focus on it. I also wanted to talk about software for project management, because I know that when I was asked to this presentation, I was asked about things like Trello and Asana. And yes, there are a lot of tools out there. There's things like MS Project. I just wanted to caution you that some of these tools really require a learning curve. And so unless you're doing this professionally, it's probably best to focus on simple tools that will be easy for you to use and don't have a learning curve. I have actually someone in another department here at Golden Gate University who was asking me about MS Project, and they were trying to manage something on it. And it was really actually more overhead than it was worth for them to do it that way. So not to discourage you if it's something you want to try out, but you really shouldn't feel bad about, honestly, a lot of project managers, we love Excel for simple things to, really it's the method of tracking and thinking that way that's important, as opposed to using the nice new bright and shiny tool. Okay, so that is the bulk of my presentation in terms of tips. Do we have any questions, Kelly, from anybody? Since I covered quite a bit of information there. I'm in my close, I'm going to talk to some resources. The templates I gave are really examples that I customized based on their tools, and there are other tools and techniques you can look up. Okay, so far it doesn't look like we have any other questions. So let me go on to resources. Oh, sorry, I skipped a slide. A couple resources. So first of all, PMI, as I mentioned, the Project Management Institute, the worldwide organization for project management, is a very active organization. They have chapters everywhere. I know, I'm guessing a lot of people here in California. California has a lot of chapters, and they have all sorts of events that are open to anyone. I actually host the PMI San Francisco Breakfast Roundtable here in San Francisco at Golden Gate University once a month, and it is free and open to anyone. But it's a great place to network and learn more about project management. I definitely encourage you. All people are welcome, and definitely, as I was saying, there's a lot of new people getting into the field, so you should feel perfectly welcome as an attorney to walk through those doors. There's also a great portal called projectmanagement.com. You know, some of the material is locked for PMI members only, but there is a lot of information available for free. There's things like templates, articles, webinars, all sorts of things about project management. And then the other thing is legal project management is really a growing field. And it was very interesting to me to do the additional research to do this presentation, because I discovered in my own law library, there were 3 or 4 books on legal project management that I thought were really outstanding. And then there's also quite a few articles and webinars and other things about it. So interestingly, legal project management seems to be really embraced by the legal profession. And so I'm finding actually a lot out there if you want to do more digging. And so Jennifer Taylor asked, what are some of your favorite team communication tools? So yes, and that's a great question, because there's a lot of new tools out there. Well, so it really depends. I mean, I think like Slack is one that's really popular. I think is really great for projects, because you can have different threads and communications. It's very dynamic, but you can have threads and communication channels on topic and hashtags. That I highly recommend that one. A very simple one is WhatsApp. That is a nice one for a team if you're really communicating sort of more immediately. I realize that I'm guessing, so I came out of banking, investment banking, and when I was at Bank of America, it was very hard for us to get instant messaging because of some of the regulatory tracking. So I don't know if some of you have some of those issues or privacy, client privilege issues. Those are, anyway, so Slack and WhatsApp are 2 that I highly recommend. I mean, I think it's also great that there are these tools like Zoom that we're using, where it gives the opportunity to talk real time in a way where you can interact via video. It's a little more personal. Yeah, it's hard I have to say, it's really hard to keep track of. There's so many tools out there. And the other thing just to say is there's this interesting combination of project management tools and communication tools. So I will say that Asana is a tool that folks in my school here who are in the marketing department and career services department really like Asana. And the reason they like it is it's both a project management tool and a communication tool. So people are able to communicate in the context of their project planning. So I would throw that one out as something that seems like people who are not project managers have embraced. Hope that answers that question. I don't know if there are other questions. Feel free to reach out. I'm at mspark@ggu.edu, and I'm also on LinkedIn. And I'm going to switch to the questions slide. It looks like there was another question. Someone said yammer and jabber. Oh my goodness, yes. There's a lot of questions out there. I'm sorry, tools out there. And I end up sort of crowdsourcing some of that information because I work with a lot of students in the professions, and I also am learning to use some of them myself. But yes, I would definitely say the tools I mentioned are just some of them, and definitely I think one of the challenges I would say in terms of being a project manager, but not just in general, is when it comes to planning communication, is finding that right medium for people. So, I think we all find this in our personal lives. So being involved in certain, like I mentioned, I was involved in Girl Scouts and involved in PTA. And it's fascinating because some people only do text. Some people only do Facebook Messenger. Some people only do email. And so I think the number one thing as a project manager, when you're doing that communication plan, it's figuring out communicating to people on the platforms they're the most comfortable on. And that is just a general 21st century challenge we all have. Like I said, thinking like a project manager is figuring out how do I best communicate to people in a platform that is most meaningful to them and is the easiest for them to use. It's interesting because at Golden Gate University here, we have adjuncts, some of them who are well past retirement. Some people are really comfortable with new communications tools and some people aren't. And so I'm sort of in the same boat in terms of trying to figure out best communications channels for my own folks. Kelly, I'm not sure if we have any other questions.
Yeah, I don't think there are any other questions at this time. I think it's really interesting to hear about project management from a different perspective, from someone from someone from the Graduate School of Business at Golden Gate, because law firms, well, they are businesses themselves. If anyone else have any other questions or are looking for other resources or tools, you can feel free to email Marie. I believe you have your LinkedIn.
Yeah, here, I'll just put it back there. So
yeah, you can contact her via email or LinkedIn. I know you have a class later today.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, I teach
definitely
today.
Contact her directly for some of her tips and tools. Thank you so much for joining us. Our next webinar will be on starting a litigation practice. It's presented by Louis Hudnell, an attorney in the Bay Area. And he'll talk about starting a litigation practice from a big law perspective, because he used to be in big law. That will be on February 13th. So you can register for that if you haven't already.
All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity. And again, I look forward to hearing from some of you and wish you the best of luck.